Καλησπέρα και καλώς ήρθατε σε άλλη μια λέξη εκφραστικής ανάγνωσης εν μέσω κορονοϊού 2022. Σήμερα είναι η Παγκόσμια ημέρα παιδικού βιβλίου, η οποία γιορτάζεται την ημέρα γέννησης του Hans Christian Andersen, αλλά δεν θα διαβάσουμε Hans Christian Andersen, θα ξεκινήσουμε την σειρά περιπέτειες, δεν θυμάμαι πώς το λέγανε στα ελληνικά, πάντως ο τίτλος περιπέτεια υπήρχε μέσα και στην ελληνική μετάφραση της Enid Blyton. Όταν ήμουν μικρή διάβασα πολύ Enid Blyton και είναι σίγουρα από τις αγαπημένες μου συγγραφείς παιδικών βιβλίων και η αγαπημένη μου σειρά από όλα τα όσα είχα διαβάσει τέλος πάντων, τις σειρές που είχε, ήταν ακριβώς η σειρά των περιπετειών. Είχαν βγει και είχαν γυριστεί και σε τηλεοπτική μορφή το BBC πριν χρόνια και τα έπαιζε η Λ.Ε.Α. μεσημέρια, τα έβλεπα φανατικά εννοείται, μόλις γυρνούσα από το σχολείο. Δυστυχώς δεν τα έχω βρει σε DVD, αν και ξέρω ότι υπάρχουν. Οπότε ναι, για τα επόμενα αναγνώσματά μας θα διαβάζουμε κάθε φορά τα 3 πρώτα κεφάλαια από τα 8 βιβλία της σειράς των περιπετειών. Το πρώτο βιβλίο στη σειρά ήταν το νησί της περιπέτειας, The Island of Adventure. 1. The beginning of things. It was really most extraordinary. There was Philip Mannering doing his best to puzzle out algebra problems, lying full length under a tree with nobody near him at all, and yet he could hear a voice speaking to him most distinctly. "Can't you shut the door, idiot?" said the voice in a most impatient tone. "And how many times have I told you to wipe your feet?" Philip sat up straight and took a good look around for the 3rd time, but the hillside stretched above and below him, completely empty of any boy, girl, man or woman. "It's so silly," said Philip to himself, "because there is no door to shut and no mat to wipe my feet on. Whoever is speaking must be perfectly mad. Anyway, I don't like it. A voice without a body is too odd for anything." A small brown nose poked up out of Philip's jersey collar. It belonged to a little brown mouse, one of the boy's many pets. Philip put up a gentle hand and rubbed the tiny creature's head. Its nose twitched in delight. "Shut the door, idiot!" roared the voice from nowhere. "And don't sniff! Where's your handkerchief?" This was too much for Philip. He roared back. "Shut up! I'm not sniffing! Who are you, anyway?" There was no answer. Philip felt very puzzled. It was uncanny and peculiar. Where did that extraordinary voice with its rude commands come from on this bright, sunny, but completely empty hillside? He shouted again, "I'm working. If you want to talk, come out and show yourself." "Right, uncle," said the voice, speaking unexpectedly in a very different tone, apologetic and quiet. "Gosh," said Philip, "I can't stand this. I'll have to solve the mystery. If I can find out where the voice comes from, I may find its owner." He shouted again, "Where are you? Come out and let me see you." "If I've told you once, I've told you 12 times not to whistle," answered the voice fiercely. Philip was silent with astonishment. He hadn't been whistling. Evidently the owner of the voice must be completely mad. Philip suddenly felt that he didn't want to meet this strange person. He would rather go home without seeing him. He looked carefully round. He had no idea at all where the voice came from, but he rather thought it must be somewhere to the left of him. All right, he would go quietly down the hill to the right, keeping to the trees if he could, so that they might hide him a little. He picked up his books, put his pencil into his pocket, and stood up cautiously. He almost jumped out of his skin as the voice broke out into cackles of laughter. Philip forgot to be cautious and darted down the hillside to the shelter of a clump of trees. The laughter stopped suddenly. Philip stood under a big tree and listened. His heart beat fast. He wished he was back at the house with the others. Then, just above his head, the voice spoke again. "How many times have I told you to wipe your feet?" And there came a most unearthly screech that made poor Philip drop his books in terror. He looked up into the tree nearby and saw a beautiful white parrot with a yellow crest on its head that it worked up and down. It gazed at Philip with bright black eyes, its head on one side, its curved beak making a grating noise. Philip stared at the parrot, and the parrot stared back. Then the bird lifted up a clawed foot and scratched its head very thoughtfully, still raising and lowering its crest. Then it spoke. "Don't sniff," it said in a conversational tone. "Can't you shut the door, idiot? Where are your manners?" "Golly," said Philip in amazement. "So it was you talking and shouting and laughing. Well, you gave me an awful fright." The parrot gave a most realistic sneeze. "Where's your handkerchief?" it said. Philip laughed. "You really are a most extraordinary bird," he said. "The cleverest I ever saw. Where have you escaped from?" "Wipe your feet," answered the parrot sternly. Philip laughed again. Then he heard the sound of a boy's voice calling loudly from the bottom of the hill. "Kiki, Kiki, Kiki, where have you got to?" The parrot spread out its wings, gave a hideous screech, and sailed away down the hillside towards a house set at the foot. Philip watched it go. "That was a boy calling it," he thought, "and he was in the garden of Hillfoot House where I'm staying. I wonder if he's come there to be crammed too. I jolly well hope he has. It would be fine to have a parrot like that living with us. It's dull enough having to do lessons in the holes. A parrot would liven things up a bit." Philip had had scarlet fever the term before, and measles immediately afterwards, so that he had missed most of his schoolwork. His headmaster had written to his uncle and aunt suggesting that he should go and stay at the home of one of the teachers for a few weeks to make up a little of what he had missed. And much to Philip's disgust, his uncle had at once agreed. So there was Philip, in the summer holidays, having to work at algebra and geography and history instead of having a fine time with his sister Dinah at his home, Craggytops by the sea. He liked the master, Mr. Roy, but he was bored with the other two boys there, who, also owing to illness, were being crammed or coached by Mr. Roy. One was much older than Philip, and the other was a poor whining creature who was simply terrified of the various insects and animals that Philip always seemed to be collecting or rescuing. The boy was intensely fond of all creatures, and had an amazing knack of making them trust him. Now he hurried down the hillside, eager to see if another pupil had joined the little holiday collection of boys to be coached. If the new boy owned the parrot, he would be somebody interesting. More interesting than that big lout of a Sam, and better fun than poor whining Oliver. He opened the garden gate and then stared in surprise. A girl was in the garden, not a very big girl, perhaps about 11. She had red hair, rather curly, and green eyes, a fair skin, and hundreds of freckles. She stared at Philip. "Hello," said Philip, rather liking the look of the girl, who was dressed in shorts and a jersey. "Have you come here?" "Looks like it," said the girl with a grin. "But I haven't come to work, only to be with Jack." "Who's Jack?" asked Philip. "My brother," said the girl. "He's got to be coached. You should have seen his report last term. He was bottom in everything. He's very clever really, but he just doesn't bother. He says he's going to be an ornithologist, so what's the good of learning dates and capes and poems and things?" Whatever it was you said?" said Philip, wondering how anyone could possibly have so many freckles on her nose as this girl had. "Ornithologist? Oh, it's someone who loves and studies birds," said the girl. "Didn't you know that? Jack's mad on birds." "He ought to come and live where I live then," said Philip at once. "I live on a very wild, lonely part of the sea coast, and there are heaps of rare seabirds there. I like birds too, but I don't know much about them. I say, does that parrot belong to Jack?" "Yes," said the girl. "He's had her for 4 years. Her name is Kiki." "Did he teach her to say all those things?" said Philip, thinking that though Jack might be bottom in all school subjects, he would certainly get top marks for teaching parrots to talk. "Oh no," said the girl, smiling so that her green eyes twinkled and crinkled. "Kiki just picked up those sayings of hers, picked them up from our old uncle, who is the crossest old man in the world, I should think. Our mother and father are dead, so Uncle Geoffrey has us in the holes, and doesn't he just hate it? His housekeeper hates us too, so we don't have much of a time, but so long as I have Jack, and so long as Jack has his beloved birds, we are happy enough. I suppose Jack got sent here to learn a few things like me, said Philip. You'll be lucky. You'll be able to play, go for walks, do what you like, whilst we are stewing in lessons. No, I shan't, said the girl. I shall be with Jack. I don't have him in the school term, so I'm jolly well going to have him in the holes. I think he's marvellous. Well, that's more than my sister Dinah thinks of me, said Philip. We're always quarrelling. Hullo, is this Jack? A boy came up the path towards Philip. On his left shoulder sat the parrot, Kiki, rubbing her beak softly against Jack's ear and saying something in a low voice. The boy scratched the parrot's head and gazed at Philip with the same green eyes as his sister had. His hair was even redder and his face so freckled that it would have been impossible to find a clear space anywhere, for there seemed to be freckles on top of freckles. "Hello, Freckles," said Philip and grinned. "Hello, Tufty," said Jack and grinned too. Philip put up his hand and felt his front bit of hair, which always rose up in a sort of tuft. No amount of water and brushing would make it lie down for long. "Wipe your feet," said Kiki severely. "I'm glad you found Kiki all right," said the girl. "She didn't like coming to a strange place, and that's why she flew off, I expect." "She wasn't far away, Lucy-Anne," said Jack. "I bet old Tufty here got a fright if he heard her up on the hillside." "I did," said Philip, and began telling the two what had happened. They laughed loudly, and Kiki joined in, cackling in a most human manner. "Golly, I'm glad you and Lucy-Anne have come here," said Philip, feeling much happier than he had felt for some days. He liked the look of the red-haired, green-eyed brother and sister very much. They would be friends. He would show them the animals he had as pets. They would go for walks together. Jack was some years older than Lucy-Anne, about 14, Philip thought, just a little older than he himself was. It was a pity Dinah wasn't there too. Then there would be 4 of them. Dinah was 12. She would fit in nicely, only perhaps with her quick impatience and quarrelsome nature it might not be peaceful. "How different Lucy-Anne and Jack are from me and Dinah," thought Philip. It was quite plain that Lucy-Anne adored Jack, and Philip could not imagine Dinah hanging on to his words, eager to do his bidding, fetching and carrying for him as Lucy-Anne did for Jack. Oh well, people are different, thought the boy. Dinah's a good sort, even if we do quarrel and fight. She must be having a pretty awful time at Craggy Tops without me. I bet Aunt Polly is working her hard. It was pleasant at tea-time that day to sit and watch Jack's parrot on his shoulder, making remarks from time to time. It was good to see the glint in Lucy-Anne's green eyes as she teased big, slow Sam and ticked off the smaller, peevish Oliver. Things would liven up a bit now. They certainly did. Holiday coaching was much more fun with Jack and Lucy-Anne there too. 2. Making friends. Mr. Roy, the holiday master, worked the children hard because that was his job. He coached them the whole of the morning, going over and over everything patiently, making sure it was understood, demanding and usually getting close attention. At least he got it from everyone except Jack. Jack gave close attention to nothing unless it had feathers. "If you studied your geometry as closely as you study that book on birds, you'd be top of any class," complained Mr. Roy. "You exasperate me, Jack Trent. You exasperate me more than I can say. Use your handkerchief," said the parrot immediately, impertinently. Mr. Roy made a clicking noise of annoyance with his tongue. "I shall wring that bird's neck one day. What with you saying you can't work unless Kiki is on your shoulder, and Philip harbouring all kinds of unpleasant creatures about his person, this holiday class is rapidly getting unbearable. The only one that appears to do any work at all is Lucy-Anne, and she hasn't come here to work." Lucy-Anne liked work. She enjoyed sitting beside Jack, trying to do the same work as he had been said. Jack mooned over it, thinking of gannets and cormorants, which he had just been reading about, whilst Lucy-Anne tried her hand at solving the problems set out in his book. She liked, too, watching Philip, because she never knew what animal or creature would walk out of his sleeve or collar or pocket. The day before, a very large and peculiarly coloured caterpillar had crawled from his sleeve to Mr. Roy's intense annoyance, and that morning a young rat had left Philip's sleeve on a journey of exploration and had gone up Mr. Roy's trouser leg in a most determined manner. This had upset the whole class for 10 minutes whilst Mr. Roy had tried to dislodge the rat. It was no wonder he was in a bad temper. He was usually a patient and amiable man, but two boys like Jack and Philip were disturbing to any class. The mornings were always passed in hard work. The afternoons were given to preparation for the next day and to the writing out of answers on the morning's work. The evenings were completely free. As there were only 4 boys to coach, Mr. Roy could give them each individual attention and try to fill in the gaps in their knowledge. Usually he was a most successful coach, but these holidays were not showing as much good work as he had hoped. Sam, the big boy, was stupid and slow. Oliver was peevish, sorry for himself, and resented having to work at all. Jack was impossible, so inattentive at times that it seemed a waste of time to try and teach him. He seemed to think of nothing but birds. If I grew feathers, he would probably do everything I told him, thought Mr. Roy. I never knew anyone so mad on birds before. I believe he knows the eggs of every bird in the world. He's got good brains, but he won't use them for anything that he's not really interested in. Philip was the only boy who showed much improvement, though he was a trial too, with his different and peculiar pets. That rat! Mr. Roy shuddered when he thought of how it had felt climbing up his leg. Really, Lucy-Anne was the only one who worked properly, and she didn't need to. She had only come because she would not be separated from her brother, Jack. Jack, Philip and Lucy-Anne soon became firm friends. The love for all living things that both Jack and Philip had drew them together. Jack had never had a real friend before, and he enjoyed Philip's jokes and teasing. Lucy-Anne liked Philip too, though she was sometimes jealous when Jack showed his liking for him. Kiki loved Philip and made funny crooning noises when the boy scratched her head. Kiki had been a great annoyance to Mr. Roy at first. She had interrupted the mornings constantly with her remarks. It was unfortunate that the master had a sniff, because Kiki spoke about it whenever he sniffed. "Don't sniff!" the parrot would say in a reproving tone, and the 5 children would begin to giggle. So Mr. Roy forbade Kiki to be brought into the classroom. But matters only became worse because Kiki, furious at being shut away outside in the garden, unable to sit on her beloved master's shoulder, sat in a bush outside the half-open window and made loud and piercing remarks that seemed to be directed at poor Mr. Roy. "Don't talk nonsense," said the parrot when Mr. Roy was in the middle of explaining some fact of history. Mr. Roy sniffed in exasperation. "Where's your handkerchief?" asked Kiki at once. Mr. Roy went to the window and shouted and waved at Kiki to frighten her away. "Naughty boy," said Kiki, not budging an inch. "I'll send you to bed. You're a naughty boy." You couldn't do anything with a bird like that. So Mr. Roy gave it up and allowed the parrot to sit on Jack's shoulder once more. Jack worked better with a bird near him, and Kiki was not so disturbing indoors as out of doors. All the same, Mr. Roy felt he would be very glad when the little holiday school came to an end, and the 4 boys and 1 girl went home, together with the parrot and the various creatures owned by Philip. Philip, Jack and Lucy-Anne left the big slow-witted Sam and the peevish little Oliver to be company for one another each day after tea, and went off on the roan together. The boys talked of all the birds and animals they had known, and Lucy-Anne listened, stumbling to keep up with them as they walked. No matter how far they walked, or what steep hills they climbed, the little girl followed. She did not mean to let her beloved brother out of sight. Philip felt impatient with Lucy-Anne sometimes. "Golly, I'm glad Dinah doesn't tag after me like Lucy-Anne tags after Jack," he thought. "I wonder Jack puts up with it." But Jack did. Although he often did not appear to notice Lucy-Anne and did not even speak to her for some time, he was never impatient with her, never irritable or cross. Next to his birds, he cared for Lucy-Anne, thought Philip. Well, it was a good thing somebody cared for her. She didn't seem to have much of a life. The 3 children had exchanged news about themselves. "Our mother and father are both dead," Jack said. "We don't remember them. They were killed in an aeroplane crash. We were sent to live with our only relation, Uncle Geoffrey. He's old and cross, always nagging at us. His housekeeper, Mrs. Miggles, hates us to go home for the holidays. And you can tell what our life is like by listening to old Kiki. Wipe your feet, don't sniff, change your shoes at once, where's your handkerchief? How many times have I told you not to whistle? Can't you shut the door, idiot?" Philip laughed. "Well, if Kiki echoes what she hears in your home, you must have a pretty mouldy time," he said. "We don't have too grand a time either. but it's better than you and Lucy-Anne have." "Are your father and mother dead too?" asked Lucy-Anne, her green eyes staring at Philip as unblinkingly as a cat's. "Our father's dead, and he left no money," said Philip. "But we've got a mother. She doesn't live with us, though." "Why not?" asked Lucy-Anne in surprise. "Well, she has a job," said Philip. "She makes enough money at her job for our schooling and our keep in the holes. She runs an art agency, you know, takes orders for posters and pictures and things, gets artists to do them for her, and then takes a commission on the sales. She's a very good businesswoman, but we don't see much of her." "Is she nice?" asked Jack. Never having had a mother that he could remember, he was always interested in other people's. Philip nodded. "She's fine," he said, thinking of his keen-eyed, pretty mother, feeling proud of her cleverness, but secretly sad when he remembered how tired she had seemed sometimes when she had paid them a flying visit. One day, thought Philip, one day he would be the clever one, earn the money, keep things going, and make things easy for his hard-working mother. "And you live with an uncle like we do?" said Lucy-Anne, stroking a tiny grey squirrel that had suddenly popped its head out of one of Philip's pockets. "Yes, Dinah and I spend all our holidays with Uncle Jocelyn and Aunt Polly," said Philip. "Uncle Jocelyn is quite impossible. He's always buying old papers and books and documents, studying them and filing them. He's making it his life work to work out the history of the part of the coast where we live. There were battles there in the old days, and burnings and killings, all most exciting. He's writing a whole history, but as it seems to take him a year to make certain of a fact or two, he'll have to live to be 400 or 500 years old before he gets a quarter of the book done, it seems to me." The others laughed. They pictured a cross and learned old man poring over yellow, musty papers. What a waste of time, thought Lucy-Anne. She wondered what Aunt Polly was like. "What's your aunt like?" she said. Philip screwed up his nose. "A bit sour," he said. "Not too bad, really. Too hard-worked, no money, no help in the old house except for old Joe, the sort of handyman helper we've got. She makes poor Dinah slave. I won't, so she has given me up, but Dinah's afraid of her and does what she's told more than I do." "What's your home like?" asked Lucy-Anne. "A funny old place, hundreds of years old, half in ruins, awfully big and draughty, set halfway up a steep cliff and almost drowned in spray in a storm," said Philip. "But I love it. It's wild and lonely and strange, and there's the cry of the seabirds are always around it. You'd love it, Freckles." Jack thought he would. It sounded exciting to him. His home was ordinary, a house in a row in a small-sized town. But Philip's house sounded really exciting. The wind and the waves and the seabirds, he felt as if he could almost hear them clamouring together when he shut his eyes. Wake up, sleepyhead," said Kiki, pecking gently at Jack's ear. He opened his eyes and laughed. The parrot had an extraordinary way of saying the right thing sometimes. "I wish I could see that home of yours, Craggy Tops," he said to Philip. "It sounds as if things could happen there. Real, live, exciting things. Thrilling adventures. Nothing ever happens in Lippington, where we live." "Well, nothing much happens at Craggy Tops either," said Philip, putting the little squirrel back into his pocket and taking a hedgehog out of another pocket. It was a baby one, whose prickles were not yet hardened and set. It seemed quite happy to live in Philip's pocket, along with a very large snail, who was careful to keep inside his shell. "I wish we were all going home together," said Jack. "I'd like to see your sister Dinah, though she does sound a bit of a wildcat to me. And I'd love to see all those rare birds on the coast. I'd like to see your old half-ruined house too. Fancy living in a house so old that it's almost a ruin. You don't know how lucky you are." "Not so lucky when you have to carry hot water for miles to the only bath in the house," said Philip, getting up from the grass where he had been sitting with the others. "Come on, it's time to get back. You're never likely to see Craggy Tops, and you wouldn't like it if you did. So what's the good of talking about it?" 3. 2 letters and a plan. The next day Philip had a letter from Dinah. He showed it to the others. "Old Dinah's having a rough time," he said. "It's a good thing I leave here soon. It's better for her when I'm there." "Dear Phil," said Dinah in a letter, "aren't you ever coming back? Not that you're much good for anything except quarrelling with, but still it's pretty lonely here with nobody but Uncle and Aunt Joe, who's even more strange than before. He told me yesterday not to go out at night down the cliff because there are things wandering about. He's quite mad. The only things wandering about besides me are the seabirds. There are thousands of them here this year. Don't, for goodness sake, bring any creatures home these holidays. You know how I hate them. I shall die if you bring a bat again, and if you dare to try and train earwigs like you did last year, I'll throw a chair at your head. Aunt Polly is making me work awfully hard. We wash and scrub and clean all day, goodness knows what for, because nobody ever comes. I shall be glad when it's time to go off to school again. When do you come back? I wish we could earn some money somehow. Aunt Polly is worrying herself to death because she can't pay some bill or other, and Uncle swears he hasn't got the money and wouldn't give it to her if he had. I suppose Mother would send more money if we asked her, but it's pretty awful to have her slaving away as she does. Anyhow, tell me more about Freckles and Lucy-Ann. I like the sound of them. Your loving sister, Dinah. Dinah sounded rather fun, Jack thought, as he read the letter and gave it back to Philip. Here you are, Tufty, he said. Dinah sounds lonely. Hello, there's Mr. Roy beckoning me. I'll see what he wants. More work, I suppose. By the same post had come a letter for Mr. Roy from the housekeeper who looked after Jack's Uncle Geoffrey. It was short and to the point. Mr. Roy had read it with dismay, and then called Jack in to show him the letter. Jack read it, also filled with dismay. Dear Mr. Roy, said the letter, Mr. Trent has broken his leg, and he doesn't want the children back these holidays. He wants to know if you will keep them with you, and he sends a cheque to cover the rest of the time. They can come back 2 days before school begins to help me to sort out their clothes. Yours faithfully, Elspeth Miggles. Oh, Mr. Roy, groaned Jack, who, much as he disliked his home, disliked the thought of staying on with Mr. Roy, and with the peevish Oliver, who was also staying on, even more than the thought of returning to his irritable uncle. I don't see why Lucy-Ann and I can't go back. We shan't go near Uncle. Mr. Roy did not want Jack to stay on any more than the boy himself did. The thought of having that parrot for 1 day longer than he needed to filled him with horror. He had never in his life disliked anything so much as he disliked Kiki. Rude boys he could deal with, and did, but rude parrots were beyond him. Well, said Mr. Roy, pursing up his lips and looking at Kiki with dislike. Well, I'm sure I don't want to keep you any longer, because it's pure waste of your time to be here. You haven't learned a thing. But I don't see what else to do. It's quite plain that your uncle doesn't want you back. You can see he has sent quite a generous cheque to cover the rest of your stay here, but I had other plans. With only Oliver here, I intended to do a little visiting. I wish we could find some place for you to go to, you and Lucy-Ann. Jack went back to his sister and to Philip, looking so dismayed that Lucy-Ann slipped her arm into his at once. What is it? What's the matter? Uncle doesn't want us back, said Jack, and explained about the letter. And Mr. Roy doesn't want us here, so it looks as if nobody loves us at the moment, Lucy-Ann. The 3 children looked at one another, and then Philip had his brainwave. He clutched at Jack, almost knocking Kiki off her balance. Jack, come back home with me. You and Lucy-Ann can come to Craggy Tops. Dinah would be thrilled. You could have a fine time with the seabirds. What about it? Jack and Lucy-Ann stared in excitement and delight. Go to Craggy Tops? Live in an old, half-ruined house with a learned uncle, an impatient aunt, a strange handyman, and the sound of the sea all the time. Now that really would be thrilling. Jack sighed and shook his head. He knew that the plans of children seldom came to anything when grown-ups had to be consulted about them. It's no good, he said. Uncle Geoffrey would probably say no, and Mr. Roy would anyway, and your uncle and aunt wouldn't just hate to have extra children on their hands. Would just hate to have extra children on their hands. They wouldn't, said Philip. You could give them the cheque that your Uncle Geoffrey sent to Mr. Roy, and I bet my aunt would be thrilled. It would pay the bill Dinah talked about in her letter. Oh, Philip! Oh, Jack! Do let's go to Craggy Tops, begged Lucy-Ann, her green eyes shining. I'd like it more than anything in the world. We'll be in the way here, Jack, if we stay on. You know we will. And I'm sure Mr. Roy will kill Kiki one day if she says any more rude things to him. Kiki gave a hideous screech and stuck her head hard into Jack's neck. It's all right, Kiki, said Jack. I won't let anyone hurt you. Lucy-Ann, honestly, it's no good asking Mr. Roy to see if we can go to Craggy Tops. He thinks it's his duty to have us here, and we'll have to stay. Well, let's go without asking him then, said Lucy-Ann recklessly. The boy stared at her without speaking. That was an idea. Go without asking. Well, why not? It would be all right if we all turned up at Craggy Tops together. Really it would, said Philip, though he was by no means certain that it would be all right at all. You see, Once you were there, my uncle and aunt couldn't very well turn you out, and I could get Aunt Polly to telephone to Mr. Roy and explain things to him, and get him to send her the cheque your Uncle Geoffrey sent for you. Mr. Roy would be glad to think we had gone, said Lucy-Anne, thinking what fun it would be to know Dinah. Uncle Geoff wouldn't care anyhow. So let's, Jack, do let's. All right, said Jack, giving way suddenly. We'll all go off together. When's your train, Tufty? We'll go down to the station, saying that we'll see you off, and we'll hop into the carriage at the last minute and go with you. Ooh, said Lucy-Anne, thrilled. Where's your handkerchief? Said Kiki, sensing the excitement and rocking herself to and fro on Jack's shoulder. Nobody took any notice of her. Poor old Kiki, said the parrot sorrowfully. Poor old Kiki. Jack put up a hand and fondled the parrot, thinking out ways and means of escape. We could wheel my trunk and Lucy-Anne's down to the station the night before when we take yours, he said. Nobody would notice ours was gone out of the loft. We could buy our tickets then too. Has anyone any money? The three of them put their money together. It would probably just buy the tickets. They simply must go off together. Now that they had made up their minds, it was quite unthinkable that anything should be allowed to prevent it. So they made their plans. The day before Philip was due to leave, his trunk was taken from the loft, and Jack managed to get his down unobserved too. He pushed it into a big cupboard in his room, and Lucy-Anne helped him pack it when no one was about. I'll wheel my trunk down to the station on the barrow, sir, said Philip to Mr. Roy. It was the custom to do this, and the master nodded, not taking much notice. He wished Jack and that parrot were going too. The boys managed to get both trunks onto the barrow without being seen, and set off to the station in great spirits. Escape seemed quite easy after all. Sam and Oliver did not seem to notice anything. Sam was too excited at leaving for home himself, and Oliver too miserable at the idea of being left behind to bother about anyone else. The next morning Philip said a polite goodbye to Mr. Roy. "Thank you for all your help and coaching, sir," he said. "I think I shall get on well next term now. Goodbye, sir." "Goodbye, Philip. You've not done badly," said Mr. Roy. Philip shook hands with Mr. Roy, who drew back a little as a mouse ran out of the boy's sleeve. Philip tacked it back again. "How can you have those creatures running about you like that?" said Mr. Roy, and sniffed loudly. "Where's your handkerchief?" said the parrot at once, and Mr. Roy glared at it. As usual, it was on Jack's shoulder. "Could I go down to the station with Lucy-Anne and see Philip off?" asked Jack. Kiki gave a squawk of laughter, and Jack gave her a little snap. "Be quiet, there's nothing to laugh about." "Naughty boy," said Kiki, just as if she knew what mischief was in Jack's mind. "Yes, you can go down and see Philip off," said Mr. Roy, thinking that it would be nice to get rid of the parrot for a little while. So the children went off together, grinning secretly at each other. Kiki had the last word with Mr. Roy. "Can't you shut the door?" she bawled. Mr. Roy gave an exasperated click and banged the door. He heard the parrot's cackle of laughter as the children went down the road. "If only I need never see that bird again," he thought to himself, little knowing that his wish was about to come true. Jack, Lucy-Anne and Philip arrived at the station in plenty of time. They found their luggage and gave it to the porter to put on the train. When the engine steamed in, they found an empty carriage and got in. No one stopped them. No one guessed that two of the children were running away. They all felt thrilled and rather nervous. "I do hope your uncle and aunt won't send us back," said Jack, stroking Kiki to quieten her. She did not like the noise of the trains and had already told one to stop whistling. An old lady looked as if she were about to get into their carriage, but when Kiki gave one of her appalling screeches, she thought again and hurried a good way up the train. At last the train moved off, with many snorts that caused the excited parrot to tell it to use its handkerchief, much to the children's amusement. It steamed out of the station, and in the distance the children saw the house where they had lived for the past few weeks, sitting at the bottom of the hill. "Well, we're off," said Philip, pleased. "And it was perfectly easy for you to escape, wasn't it? Golly, what fun it will be to have you and Lucy-Anne at Craggy Tops! Dinah will be thrilled to bits when we arrive." "Off to Craggy Tops," sang Lucy-Anne. "Off to the sea and the wind and the caves. Off to Craggy Tops." Yes, off to Craggy Tops, and to a wild and astonishing time that not one of the children could possibly have imagined. Off to Craggy Tops, and off to adventure. Καλό βράδυ.